Hey everyone, and welcome back. I'm Mike Wade. Thank you for tuning in to Dissect and Connect, a podcast where we explore population health issues impacting your community. This podcast is a service of Montgomery County Prevention Partners and New River Valley Community Services. Our podcast is made possible by a grant from Carilion Clinic. The views expressed in this program may not reflect those of Carilion Clinic. Rebecca Moore serves as the integrative health liaison for New River Valley Community Services. In this role, Rebecca facilitates collaboration between local pediatric offices and NRVCS to connect children and their families with access to mental health services. Rebecca has an extensive background working with youth and families over the past 15 years in a variety of capacities. She earned her bachelor's degree in human services from Virginia Tech and obtained her master's in marriage and family therapy through Liberty University. Since being trained by renowned trauma expert Dr. Allison Sampson-Jackson, Rebecca has conducted multiple trauma trainings over the past 5 years, both internally for NRVCS staff and also for a number of groups and organizations throughout Southwest Virginia. Rebecca continues to be a champion for development of a trauma-informed culture, not only within her own agency, but throughout the entire New River Valley. So Rebecca, welcome to the Dissect and Connect podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here this morning.
Yeah, we are glad to have you. So, we've got to start off talking about the elephant in the room. How have you been personally impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic?
So it's kind of been an interesting journey and evolution. I would say probably the biggest impact is having my children home full time.
Right.
And taking on an additional role as teacher, as well as full-time employee and parent, and really just trying to find a balance and how to meld all of that together. I have family that live in Philadelphia, and so a lot of the changes that we've seen down here in Virginia, they experienced pretty much on a 2-week prior increment. So They were at a stay-at-home order 2 weeks before we were, and so it was sort of a little bit of a benefit, I guess I could say, because I almost had like a heads up because they were reporting what they were experiencing. And then I just started to see the trend evolve. And so it was like, okay, well, buckle up and get ready, because if this is what's going on up there, it's probably going to start happening down here. And really just finding different ways to connect with people, because a lot of the interactions and things that we do as a family on a daily basis, or ways that we would connect with my family out of town, aren't an option right now. So we've gotten really good at being creative and finding creative things to do to fill time and get along with each other, and manage stress during a really stressful time.
Yeah. How old are your kids now?
So I have a 12-year-old who's in 6th grade, and I have a 7-year-old who is in 1st grade.
Okay. And they're adjusting okay?
Are they adjusting okay?
Yeah.
That's yet another interesting journey. Initially, when they go to Radford City schools, and so they were on spring break for a week before kids were going to stay at home anyway.
Right.
So they had a week break, then they just never went back. And so initially, when I told the kids that we had evolved from just staying home for 2 weeks to now you won't be going back to school at all, they each handled it a little bit differently. My 12-year-old had some tears and really wanted some space, and so we were walking out in the park, and my 7-year-old was like, "No, please come play with me." And I said, "This is tough, and we all just need some space and to give each other a chance to cope with how we need to and process the information, and he'll be back. Just give him some time." And then, then it was a little bit of excitement of like, "Oh, I don't have to go to school. This is going to be so great. Like, I love it." And then give it about a week, and again, it was like, "This is horrible, and I want to go back, and I want my friends." And so we took some pauses, and I said, "I want you to really just take a moment and focus on that sentence you just said, so that when you go back and you are complaining, you can remember that time that you so desperately wanted to be at school." So it's been good. They've done a really great job of adjusting to doing work at home. Which I think was a big shift as well, because home used to be a time for fun and relaxing. And yes, there was some homework, but not at the level there is now.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing with this being kind of extended is that we're going to get used to it. And then when we have to shift our routine back to whatever normal is, it's going to be an adjustment. It really is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So here's a question. Why did you choose mental health for a career?
Kind of an interesting answer to that. So initially, I started off my college career at Virginia Tech, and I went in undecided. And so that magical time came when you had to make a decision about what you were going to do.
Yeah.
And so I sat down with the book of options of the many, many different programs that they had. And I narrowed it down to either mental health or interior design.
Oh, okay.
So a real interesting, dynamic right there.
Yeah.
And I just kind of weighed it out, and I read the little descriptives on each, and the more that I kept reading about mental health and that work that you do with individuals and the connection and having an opportunity to really have an impact in people's lives, I said, okay, that's the one I'm doing.
Okay.
And that's what started my career.
Well, how about that?
Yeah, and I've really been happy with that decision. I think it was a really good fit for me. I loved the classes, and so that was a really good indicator to me that was definitely a good path that I chose, because I had a lot of interest in learning about human development and communication skills and problem solving skills and families and genograms and all the big keywords that we talk about in counseling. So once I graduated and started in the field, I really felt satisfied with the direction that I chose.
Yeah. And there's always time for interior design later, right?
Oh, hey, and you can do it on the side. Like, that's the beautiful thing. There's Pinterest, there's, the home shows. So, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Hey, I'd like for you to talk a little bit more about your job and your current position within NRVCS, because I think when, for a lot of people, when you say integrative care liaison, that doesn't mean much. So talk a little bit more about that, if you would.
Sure, absolutely. So the job is based out of one of our local pediatric offices, which happens to be the biggest pediatric office, or practice, should I say, in the New River Valley. It's with New River Valley Peds. They have a location in Blacksburg and a location in Radford. And my primary role with them is to really be a bridge between their patients and our clients, or their patients and individuals in the community who've not yet gotten linked into services. And so if individuals have not got linked into services, then I really work with those families to identify what is the need and what would be the best service fit for them, and help them find options and make sure that they're able to connect with those options. If they already have services with NRVCS, oftentimes I'm asked to get collateral information just to help the doctors with making decisions, maybe on medication or treatment modalities or things that would be helpful for the family. It's helpful to get follow-up from the therapists, like how are they doing if there's medication changes or shifts. And then also, in addition, if clients come into the PEDS office and maybe they're not established there, but they have some pretty significant needs and the doctors don't know what to do, I'm there and available to help really consult and say, let's figure this out. Here's what we can do with this person. Maybe this is a crisis, maybe this isn't a crisis. So I can really help kind of give some information on what direction to take with families and children. In addition, what's grown from that is some opportunities to do some other jobs in the community. Running a grandparents group was one of them, which was established by one of the PCPs who is on staff and was recognizing a huge trend and uptick in grandparents raising grandchildren. And then also at times I'm able to do some outpatient work with some of their clients, especially if it's just a consult basis where they maybe only need 1 or 2 check-ins, learn some coping strategies, really identify and figure out what's going on, but don't need long-term intervention. And so that's been a really nice payoff too, because then we have kids that come in that may not necessarily be a great fit anywhere. Maybe they're a college student. Maybe their insurance is kind of in flux at the moment, but I'm able to touch base with them, help them out, stay connected with the doctors, give them updates, and then hopefully reintegrate them without services because they've learned the tools that they need.
I'm curious in that setting if you, because you've been doing this for a couple of years now, are you seeing any kind of trends in addition to the thing that you mentioned about grandparents raising grandchildren? Are there other things that you're seeing in your work that kind of jump out at you and make you think, oh, yeah, I'm seeing more and more of this? Just anecdotally speaking, obviously.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I know that we definitely see a lot with regards to the opioid crisis at times. There's a lot of pregnant moms or babies that are have dependence issues when they're born, and so that's a part of things. And really looking at single parenting with young people or young people having babies, and do they have the resources that they need just to do parenting? Because oftentimes it's not a question of love; it's just a question of education and skills, and do they
Right.
have those necessary to raise the children in the way that they want to?
Right.
And so that's something that we also address and look at pretty consistently.
Okay, great. So, as I noted in your bio for the intro for today's show, you have delved into the world of trauma fairly extensively. But there may be a lot of people listening who don't necessarily understand trauma. So I wonder if maybe you could take a little time to talk about what trauma is exactly.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something that we work hard to have people feel like they have a good understanding for trauma. Because as you said, it's a big word. It's kind of a scary word.
Mm-hmm.
People don't like to talk about it or address it because it just sort of feels like Pandora's box. That
Right.
if we say the big T, then all of a sudden we're going to have to get into some really icky stuff.
Yeah.
But what we break it down so that to try to have some simplicity with it is the SAMHSA definition of trauma. And that's where we look at the 3 E's. So you have an event or a series of events that an individual or a group of individuals experiences that creates lasting long-term adverse effects. And those effects can be seen anywhere. They can be seen spiritually, emotionally, physically, really in any facet of their life that's impacting them to in a manner that they're not functioning at their best capacity. And trauma is huge, and it's something that the state has recognized as a big issue. The country's recognized it as a big issue, even in years prior to what we're experiencing right now. And what we've learned as mental health professionals is that in order to really help somebody heal and move forward, we do need to be cognizant of what they may have experienced in their life, what may have been traumatizing to them, what may be a triggering event for them, because that will continue to repeat in their life if they've not addressed it or haven't figured out coping strategies or skills to combat that, those lacking skills that that trauma may have created.
Okay. So why is it important for us as a community or a family or however you want to look at it? Why is it important for us to understand trauma?
Sure. So what we've really come to find out through the research is that, trauma is one of the big foundational issues. So if you kind of think about a pyramid, what we recognize is that really at that bottom level of that pyramid, that everything else really sort of builds off of are those ACEs, those adverse childhood experiences or trauma, or events that are causing chronic ongoing stress. And so if we're not able to, number one, acknowledge and recognize that it exists and that it's there, honor that they've experienced it, and then also recognize how it's impacting them in their development, then really it's hard to see lasting long-term improvement because we haven't addressed those lacking skills. We haven't addressed really the foundation of what's creating a lot of the conflict and friction in their lives. And it's important because it's prevalent. We know that at least 7 out of 10 people in the general population have experienced it. We know that within behavioral health systems or public health systems that it's 9 out of 10, and that includes the employees that work there. So it's something that really does have an impact on everyone, whether you've experienced it or you're working with someone who has experienced it. So in order to be effective, in order to have people feel competent and feel seen, I think, starting with trauma and acknowledging it and really helping people understand it is just a really good foundational plan, if you will, I guess, or a blueprint to helping people learn how to heal and grow and just relate to one another in a better way.
Yeah. And you mentioned adverse childhood experiences or ACEs. Can you talk a little bit more about how not recognizing that and addressing that can really change the trajectory of a young person as they develop into adulthood?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really fascinating because a lot of this does come down to science. So it's not just mental health speak, if you will.
Right.
There's a lot of really good scientific evidence that backs up how chronic stress and trauma can impact people, especially the brain development and just bodily system development in a young person.
Mm-hmm.
What we have found is that if people have, so there's a list of ACEs. There's 16 that were studied longitudinally. So those are the ones that are most well known. And for sake of this conversation, those are the ones that we'll refer to. But there's 16 ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, that were studied by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente back in the 90s. And what we know is that if individuals have experienced 4 or more, it automatically places them at greater risk of certain health issues. And this has nothing to do with coping strategies or coping styles that they may or may not partake in. Because, some of the at-risk things are increased risk for drug use or intravenous drug use, smoking, drinking,
right,
obesity, suicide, depression. What we also know, though, is that there's some systemic things that you have an increased potential to experience that has nothing to do with any of that. So like COPD, emphysema, lung problems, ischemic heart disease, cardiovascular diseases, liver diseases. And the reasoning for that is because chronic stress changes the brain structure. It forces an individual to operate out of a fight or flight response, which is their lower brain. And when you go into that fight or flight response, what ends up happening is it triggers parts of the body that release those hormones. You've got your cortisol, you have your adrenaline,
mm-hmm.
all of those stress hormones that start being released into your system on a much higher and more consistent level than what's typical or what's healthy. It is healthy to have those responses and have those reactions when you do have a true threat that's coming at you. That's how your body signals survive,
right.
Get through this.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's something that's being triggered over and over and over and over again, what ends up happening is that the whole chemistry and makeup of the human body starts to shift. And what we know from science is that when you have excess stress hormones that are circulating through your body over and over and over again, it causes physical changes in your body. And so if that goes on throughout the lifespan, childhood, early adulthood, later adulthood, ultimately, what we also know is the ultimate risk is that people can die 20 years earlier than the average population.
Yeah, that's telling. I mean, that says a lot. It really does.
Yeah, it's significant. Absolutely.
Yeah. So is it possible for people to recover or adapt and sort of change the impact of trauma and how it might impact their life?
Absolutely. And I think that's what we really try to focus on is that, yes, there's a lot of really tough things to have to acknowledge about trauma. However, as human beings, we are incredibly adaptable. We are incredibly resilient. And with the right things in place, you absolutely can recover from trauma. We've seen it generationally. We've seen it individually, collectively as a society. There's been situations where people have evolved and come out on the other end. And people always ask, like, okay, so we know what it is and we know it exists, but what do we do? And so that's where we really come in as mental health professionals and try to work on connection and resiliency. What the studies have shown is that if you have connection to at least one solid individual, and they can be there and have a healthy attachment with you, that sometimes that's all it takes is just that one person. Mm-hmm. We also know that there are resiliency skills that people can learn. And that's what we always remind people is it's not a trait, it's a skill. Traits you're born with, you can't change it. Skill, you can learn, you can develop.
Right.
And part of our job is to help people figure out what are those lacking skills and how do we really work behaviorally to start to implement and practice those skills, mm-hmm. so that when we're hit with tough times, because ultimately, throughout life, they don't stop. We continue to have difficult things that we encounter, stressful events, things of that nature. But if we've built that toolbox, is what I like to refer to it as, of resiliency skills, then people feel more competent, they feel more confident, mm-hmm. to be able to get through those really tough times and know that they don't have to necessarily rely on those previous behaviors that were effective ultimately because it did help them survive, but it doesn't help them thrive.
Right.
And we really want to look at how do we help somebody thrive, not just survive.
Right. Could you touch upon a few of those resiliency skills and give us an idea of what those might look like?
Yeah, sure. So we have a list of 42 of them, and they're all pretty interchangeable with regards to the different types of trauma that one might have experienced, like where there might be lacking. But some real simple ones are things like being able to trust others, being able to ask for help, being able to express emotions, being able to say I love you, problem solving skills, teamwork, being able to connect to another individual, expressing joy and satisfaction. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Some of the other ones might be like emotional fluency and being able to identify emotions in general. Mm-hmm. So they're real simple, basic skills. But oftentimes, not to downplay it, oftentimes we don't learn these things. Right. Systemically, generationally as families, if someone didn't teach your parents, they don't have the capacity to teach you. Right. We don't learn them in school often. Mm-hmm. School is much more academically focused. It's not necessarily social emotionally focused. Right. And so oftentimes there are these gaps in some pretty simple but highly important social emotional skills. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. I've had multiple conversations over the last couple of weeks about the long-term effects of the pandemic and what we may see not only during but after, and once we get back to whatever normal is, or what that will be. I wonder if you could speak to the potential impact of the pandemic on trauma and adverse childhood experiences.
Sure. So I think, there's a lot of different layers to it. I think you've got, if we start off at the basics, from a societal standpoint, as you pointed out, normal's gone. Yeah. And I think that's a really tough concept to kind of grasp, is what we once knew as a normal life, no matter what, is going to look different. And so there is a very legit grieving process that goes with that. Mm-hmm. We've been asked to adapt to many different things over the past couple of weeks. We went from some restrictions to, we went from no restrictions to some restrictions, then all, really significant restrictions. Right. And now we're looking at loosening up some restrictions. And I think with that comes a lot of anxiety because the virus is still out there. It's still multiplying in numbers. It's not going away. Right. There's a lot of differentiating information. So I think with that brings trust issues. And when people don't necessarily feel like they can trust the information that they're getting from their leadership in the country, that's scary. That can feel traumatizing in and of itself. Yeah. That, lack of transparency and trust and consistency. Mm-hmm. And if anything, this has been nothing but inconsistency. Yeah. And that's just because it's the nature of the beast. Yep. It's nobody's fault. It just is what it is. Right. I think some other things that have been brought up, and I know our governor touched on it when he talked about a lot of the restrictions that were being put in place, is an increase of domestic violence, an increase of potential abuse and neglect, alcoholism. Mm-hmm. And those are all things that already exist and people already experience. But when there's a lot of isolation and people don't have access to the supports that maybe once sort of monitored those conditions, there is a real potential for that to get much worse and those experiences to be much worse. And really, we won't know that until some type of integration starts to happen again. Right. So I think that, those are some individual levels where there's some trauma that could be happening that's isolated. And then you've got the cultural and the society level trauma of normal's gone. There's all kinds of change. Can I keep myself healthy? Can I keep my family healthy? Can I continue to provide? Can I continue to fulfill my role where a lot of these are identity things as well. If you've lost your job or you can't work and that's how you've really created an identity for yourself. I mean, that can be horribly traumatic of like, who am I? I don't have a purpose. What is my purpose? Right. And I think the other pieces too is really how do we help our children with their emotions and their feelings? Because it's easy to think, oh, they're fine. They're okay. But they overhear things. They overhear news reports. They overhear parents talking. They overhear neighbors talking or, whatever. And sure. And some of that information can be scary. I know my youngest woke up one night and I still can't tell if it was a dream or what was going on, but she woke up in the middle of the night and kept saying to me, I touched my face. And it took me a minute, and I kept saying, what?
Yeah.
What do you mean? Like, that's okay, you can touch your face. No, I touched my face. And I'm like, that's okay. And then finally she said, but if I touch my face, I could get sick. And I went, wow.
Yeah.
And so we've had a lot of discussions around, yes, cleanliness and keeping ourselves safe and healthy, but also trying to keep a balance of, but we can't control everything. Right. And so, here's the hope, here's the potential, but if it happens, here's our plan. Here's how we might take care of it. Here's how we might address it. And at the end of the day, we're here to help and take care of each other and love each other, and we're going to be okay. Yeah. So yeah, I think there's a lot of anxiety with everyone. I think there's a lot of passion. You see it in the news. You see the protesters. You see the anger, the frustration, the fear. Yeah. And those are all normal human emotions. But I think there's also still a lot of hope and a lot of love and a lot of joy to still be had, even through all of this.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of good still out there. And
absolutely,
we're getting to see some of the best of that, despite the challenges that we're all up against. So
yeah, for sure.
Always good to focus on the positive, right?
If we can, absolutely.
How about one takeaway or a parting word of wisdom that you might share with our audience?
So I think something that I keep coming back to is really just being gentle and kind with yourself, because that will translate to everything else.
Yeah.
To elaborate on that just a little bit is the fact that at times we have what's called meta emotions, and meta emotions are the feelings that we have about our own feelings. And so oftentimes, if we're anxious or we're stressed out or we're angry or maybe we're feeling judgmental, and then all of a sudden we start to feel guilty about feeling that way. And I shouldn't feel that way. And no, like that should not be something that I'm thinking right now, or I shouldn't be expressing this. Is knowing that there is no normal right now.
Right.
There's no normal. There's no one size fits all to handling things. Some days may feel incredibly normal and may feel like, oh, nothing's going on. I haven't watched the news. I'm just doing my normal routine. It's life as usual. And then some days may feel completely disjointed and completely foreign, and like you can't get your footing, and like the bottom's always falling out. And in a sense, that's normal. That's normal for a time when everything is kind of up in the air and we don't know what to expect.
Yeah.
And so just allowing yourself to experience those emotions and know that it's okay, and know as best as possible to not be in judgment of yourself for whatever emotion comes up and however you feel in any given day. Because this is a confusing time. It's something we've never experienced before. And so we're really it's kind of the blind leading the blind. We're all just navigating the best that we can. So just be gentle and be kind to yourself.
Perfect way to sum it up.
Thanks.
Rebecca, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast today, and all the information that you share has been incredibly valuable. If someone's interested in learning more about trauma, or potentially maybe a future training opportunity about trauma, how could they get in touch with you?
Sure. So they can email me. My email is rstuart, it's spelled Stuart, at nrvcs.org.
Fantastic. And we'll include that information in the show notes, along with some other potential resources that people might be able to look at and learn more about trauma.
Awesome.
All right.
Awesome. That sounds great.
Rebecca, thanks again.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Dissect and Connect. For more information about Montgomery County Prevention Partners, our New River Valley Community Services, be sure to check us out on Facebook or visit nrvcs.org.